In 1989, UFO researcher William Moore stepped on stage at a conference in Las Vegas and confessed. He'd been working with Air Force intelligence for years, helping feed fabricated stories about aliens to a fellow researcher named Paul Bennewitz. Moore watched as Bennewitz's mental health collapsed under the weight of manufactured delusions. That confession wasn't rumor, it was recorded on video, and it demolished the foundation of the most persistent legend in UFO history, the alleged underground alien base beneath Dulce, New Mexico. The Dulce base story has circulated for over 40 years, claims of a massive underground facility where the U.S. military collaborates with extraterrestrial beings, genetic experiments on abducted humans, an alleged firefight between soldiers and alien creatures in 1979. The story has generated books, documentaries, and pilgrimages to a remote town on the Jicarilla Apache Reservation in northern New Mexico. But the documented evidence points somewhere else entirely. Not to aliens, to a verified government disinformation campaign that destroyed one man's life and poisoned UFO research for decades. Because the Air Force didn't go to extraordinary lengths over nothing. Something near Kirtland Air Force Base was worth protecting at enormous human cost. The real question isn't whether aliens live beneath Dulce, New Mexico. It's this. What was so sensitive that the Air Force decided it was acceptable to systematically drive an American citizen insane rather than risk exposure? The documented record includes on-the-record confessions from intelligence agents involved, declassified Air Force materials, and a public admission at a national conference that turned the UFO research community inside out. The cover story was manufactured deliberately, and the people who manufactured it eventually said so. Start with the setting. Dulce sits in Rio Arriba County, northern New Mexico. Population roughly 3,000. Seat of the Jicarilla Apache Nation. In the early 1980s, claims emerged that a secret multi-level base existed deep beneath Archuleta Mesa, just northwest of town. 7 levels. Joint human-alien operation. Lower floors allegedly housing genetic laboratories. Some versions described captive humans in cages. Sounds like a screenplay pitch. For most people, that's where the assessment ends. But the legend didn't materialize from nowhere. It traces directly back to one man, and what happened to that man is not speculative, it is documented. Paul Bennewitz was a physicist and president of Thunder Scientific Corporation, a small electronics firm holding a legitimate Department of Defense contract. His facility sat adjacent to Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico. In the late 1970s, using his own sophisticated equipment, Bennewitz began intercepting unusual electronic signals. He also reported observing anomalous lights near the Manzano Mountains, which form the eastern boundary of the Kirtland complex. Bennewitz didn't post about it on the internet. The internet didn't exist yet in any public form. He compiled recordings, assembled data, brought everything directly to the Air Force. He believed, sincerely, that he had intercepted extraterrestrial communications. The Air Force took his report. What followed should have been a routine debriefing, maybe a polite thank you and a dismissal. Instead, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, AFOSI, assigned Special Agent Richard Doty to handle the situation. Handle, that word does enormous work in this story. According to declassified materials and Doty's own later admissions, delivered on camera for the 2013 documentary Mirage Men, AFOSI didn't merely dismiss Bennewitz's alien theory, they actively amplified it. Doty has acknowledged providing Bennewitz with fabricated documents, fictitious alien communication protocols, and detailed narratives about underground bases, including, specifically, a joint human-alien facility beneath Dulce, New Mexico. The logic was ruthless but simple. Bennewitz was intercepting real signals, not extraterrestrial, classified electronic emissions from programs at Kirtland and the adjacent Manzano weapons storage facility. Manzano was a genuine underground installation where the U.S. military stored nuclear warheads during the Cold War. Bennewitz may also have been picking up transmissions from Sandia National Laboratories or the Starfire Optical Range, both within the same sprawling complex, both conducting deeply classified weapons research. Real signals, terrestrial source, maximum classification level. Telling Bennewitz the truth would have meant acknowledging programs the government couldn't discuss under any circumstances. So they gave him a different explanation, one he'd accept, one that sounded crazy to anyone outside the UFO community, one that would automatically discredit him if he ever went public. And Bennewitz, already inclined toward extraterrestrial explanations, built on it. He constructed elaborate theoretical models of alien communication systems. He wrote detailed reports. He told anyone who would listen. Over months, then years, his mental state deteriorated. Paranoia deepened. He became convinced aliens were monitoring his home, controlling his thoughts. By the mid-1980s, Paul Bennewitz required hospitalization for psychiatric treatment. Friends and colleagues described a man who had been psychologically dismantled, piece by people he trusted. The classified signals were no longer a security concern. Mission accomplished. The full scope of the operation surfaced 4 years later. William Moore, a serious UFO researcher, co-author of the first major Roswell book, stood before the annual MUFON Symposium in 1989 and admitted he'd been cooperating with AFOSI for years. Recruited by Doty and other intelligence contacts, Moore had been feeding disinformation into the UFO research community. He claimed he went along because he believed cooperation would eventually yield genuine UFO data in return. The audience turned hostile almost immediately. Moore's credibility within ufology was finished. But his public confession independently corroborated the Bennewitz story from inside the operation itself. It confirmed that military intelligence wasn't just targeting one vulnerable individual. They were managing the entire information environment around UFOs, planting stories, manufacturing evidence, using believers as unwitting distribution channels for fabricated narratives. The fabricated material wasn't limited to what Bennewitz received personally. Around this same period, a set of papers known as the MJ-12 documents surfaced within the UFO community, allegedly proving the existence of a top-secret government group managing alien contact since 1947. Initially, some researchers took them seriously. Subsequent forensic analysis identified multiple problems: incorrect date formatting, typeface inconsistencies, classification markings that matched no known government standard from any era. Most credible analysts now regard the MJ-12 papers as fabrications, likely produced by the same intelligence network running the Bennewitz operation. Another manufactured layer of noise, injected deliberately into a community already struggling to separate signal from static. So set aside alien theories entirely. What is documented, on the record, confirmed by the participants themselves, is this: the United States Air Force conducted a sustained psychological operation against a private American citizen and potentially a broader segment of the research community to protect classified programs in New Mexico. The Manzano complex was among the largest nuclear weapons storage installations in the country. Sandia National Laboratories, immediately adjacent to Kirtland, was and remains a primary nuclear weapons design facility. The Starfire Optical Range conducted advanced directed energy and laser weapons research throughout the 1980s. This cluster represented some of the most sensitive operations in the entire U.S. defense infrastructure. Bennewitz's intercepted signals almost certainly originated from one or more of these programs. And the Air Force made its calculation. Easier to let a man destroy himself chasing aliens than to risk any scrutiny of nuclear weapon storage and directed energy development. That calculation cost Paul Bennewitz his mental health, his reputation, and much of his remaining life. Now, there's one more thread woven through the Dulce story. Harder to assess. Can't skip it, but the evidentiary weight needs to be stated plainly. Phil Schneider was a man who, starting in 1995, gave public lectures claiming he'd been a government geologist and structural engineer who worked on deep underground military bases, including one beneath Dulce, New Mexico. He described a 1979 confrontation between U.S. military personnel and alien beings. He called it the Dulce Wars. He displayed scars he attributed to alien weapons fire. His claims are extraordinary and entirely unverified. No independent documentation confirms his alleged government employment. No corroborating witness has surfaced. His accounts are vivid, internally detailed, and impossible to confirm or refute with available evidence. In January 1996, Phil Schneider was found dead in his apartment in Wilsonville, Oregon. Official determination: suicide. His ex-wife and supporters disputed the finding, citing what they described as inconsistencies, the specific ligature marks, missing lecture materials, missing photographs. Suspicious circumstances? Arguably. Proven foul play? No. No investigation has produced documented evidence contradicting the official finding. Schneider's claims and death belong firmly in Tier 3, speculative, uncorroborated, unresolvable with current evidence. The Bennewitz affair, by contrast, sits in Tier 1, confirmed by multiple independent sources, corroborated by the perpetrators on camera, supported by declassified records. That distinction matters enormously when evaluating the Dulce legend as a whole. So what holds up when everything is weighed flat? The underground alien base beneath Dulce, New Mexico, the legend that still generates pilgrimages and documentaries decades later, was, based on the strongest available evidence, fabricated by the United States Air Force intelligence as part of a documented disinformation operation. The operatives admitted it. Multiple sources corroborate it. The motive, protecting classified nuclear and weapons infrastructure, is both verified and logical. What remains genuinely unresolved is narrower but arguably more consequential. How wide did the disinformation campaign actually extend? How many other researchers were fed manufactured evidence beyond Bennewitz and the known network around Moore? Were there classified programs beyond nuclear storage and directed energy research that required this extraordinary level of active deception? And the question that still shadows the entire field of UFO research: once a government has documented to have manufactured false evidence about UFOs on an industrial scale, how does anyone evaluate anything else that emerged from those same years and those same intelligence sources? That's the lasting damage. Not to Bennewitz alone, though what was done to him was indefensible by any reasonable standard. The deeper wound is epistemological. The disinformation campaign succeeded so completely that over 40 years later, the manufactured cover story remains more famous than the verified operation that created it. People still travel to Dulce, New Mexico looking for an alien base. Almost nobody talks about the Air Force systematically breaking a private citizen to protect a nuclear weapons facility. The aliens under Dulce were fiction. The conspiracy to plant that fiction in a man's mind, that was real. And the hardest question isn't about what lies beneath Archuleta Mesa. It's about what a government is willing to do to its own people when it decides a secret matters more than a life. Subscribe for more. We release new videos every week.